Here now to talk all things Bay Area politics is KCBS political reporter Doug Sovern. Doug, let's start off with one of the most divisive topics right now, at least in San Francisco. It is this redistricting process. When you look at it, a lot of it is based on data from the latest census, but this has become a very emotional issue.
It sure has, Anne. You know, the whole point of these redistricting commissions or the task force that San Francisco has set up was to try to take the politics out of this and make these things less fraught with contention and controversy. That has not worked in San Francisco. I mean, you've got everybody just going at each other and calling each other terrible names at meetings and on social media, and it's become this toxic mess as they race to meet this deadline to put out new maps, right? Should that be so hard to redraw the 11 districts for San Francisco supervisor races? Okay, we'll move you here, we'll move you there. Everybody's even. That's good. It's about 80,000 people per district. But it has just devolved into chaos. And whatever they do end up coming up with is probably going to be challenged in court. This is going to go on for a while, and it's pitted all these different groups against each other in San Francisco, and it's been really a mess.
When you think about redistricting messes, it's a lot of times caused by one political party or the other trying to gain control of a situation or an area. Is that what we're seeing here? Or is this more like social issues at force?
Well, in San Francisco, it's not really political parties. You're right. I mean, at the state level, when you're drawing up congressional districts with about 700,000 people in each one, it's how many Democrats here, how many Republicans there. They fight over who's going to get which district. In San Francisco, you know, it's 85% Democrats, so it's not, the Republican Party doesn't have much to say here. But what it is in San Francisco, it has been LGBTQ constituents upset about their power being diluted if people are moved, say, from south of Market and Tenderloin, split into two different districts, diluting voting power. It's Asian Americans upset about Chinese voters in particular being siphoned off in different districts, so they'll have less voting power. It's liberal versus moderate, you know, progressive versus moderate liberal. It's east side of the city versus west side of the city. And all these different groups are at war with each other over who's going to make up which district. Because, you know, in San Francisco, it's a very dense city. And if you look at what's happened in San Francisco over the last 10, 20 years, there are whole neighborhoods where people live now where there weren't that many people before. Mission Bay didn't even exist 20 years ago. South of Market, all those new high-rise apartment buildings. So there are too many people now living in those neighborhoods, and those districts have to be redrawn so that some of them move into another district, and that is what's really causing a lot of the problem here.
Let's talk a little bit about the state debate right now about reparations, either cash payments to people who are descendant of slaves or everybody who is of African American descent. This is something that California is the first in the nation to take on, which is interesting because, of course, we didn't even have real slavery in our state.
Yeah, California is leading the way on this, as it does on so many things, with this state task force to decide what to do about reparations. And first, they had a very long debate, which went on for a while, over, you know, who's eligible. And they came down on the side of it should be people who are descendant from slaves or from what they're defining in the terminology as free blacks in prior to 1900. So maybe someone who got freed or who lived during the time of slavery in California. So it's not going to be every black Californian. It's only going to be people who can show some lineage. And that was a really fierce debate. Now they've moved on to, well, what do we do? Do we just give everybody $25,000 as happened with Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II or some other number? Or do we do something beyond that? You know, invest in education, try to close equity gaps in minority neighborhoods. It's probably going to be some combination of both of those things. They'll invest money in areas where they think it can help a larger segment of the population, and there may be some cash payments. But this has gone on for a while, and it's continuing to go on, and now they're meeting in San Francisco for the first time, 2 full days of hearings at Third Baptist Church, where the Reverend Amos Brown, of course, has been pastor for almost half a century. He's the vice chair of the statewide task force on this, and he's its senior member. He has a lot of say in which way they go. It's another very heated issue with people feeling really passionately on all sides of it. Some who think there shouldn't be reparations at all. Some who think their definition of who should get them is flawed, but they're going to have to work this out in the next couple of months because they have to send a report to the legislature, and we could see some action in Sacramento paying money out a year from now.
And what kind of receipt is it going to get in Sacramento from what you can tell at this point?
I think it'll pass. I think whatever they come up with, I mean, it'll be subject to more debate there in the legislature and probably more amendment and fine tuning. But I think whatever they come up with, what they send to the legislature, given that this task force was created by the state and is chaired by Shirley Weber, who was in the legislature and is now Secretary of State, I think they'll work something out. It'll go to the governor's desk, and a year from now or so, a little more, summer of 23, let's say, California will become, or by the fall of 23, the first state to reward reparations in some form, whether it's a larger societal investment or actual cash payments to descendants of slaves.
All right, we will keep our eye on that. Meantime, the governor race, we've talked about that several times over the last few weeks, and it looked like there was no challengers. Now we're seeing a little bit more from Michael Schellenberger. People might know him as the author of the book San Francisco. So he is somebody who has a lot of criticism about some of the liberal policies we have here in the Bay Area, and many of them that Governor Newsom is responsible for. How do you think he's going to fare in this race?
You know, he's getting some play. We're going to have him on the radio on our State of California show next Monday. You know, he's a progressive Berkeley Democrat who has focused on, and he's an investigative journalist who's focused on homelessness and policies towards it and the things that happen in San Francisco in particular, but in cities in general. But, you know, he ran before and was barely a blip on the radar. He's maybe a larger blip this time, but still mostly an asterisk. I mean, if the guy gets 5%, I'd be really surprised. I mean, there's no major viable challenger to Governor Newsom. There will be a token Republican on the ballot, Brian Daly. Maybe he gets 30% at best. You've got people like Schellenberger, who are, you know, a gadfly who would attract Democrats and maybe moderates and some Republicans as well. But it's hard to see someone like that really gaining a lot of traction. He may make a bit of noise. He'll get some media coverage, but in the end, I think most Democrats are going to vote for Gavin Newsom, and he cruises into the November general election into a re-election victory.
All right. Well, we will be looking forward to Schellenberger on your program on KCBS State of California. And we'll get some of those challengers here on the CBS News Bay Area as well. Doug, as always, we appreciate your insight.
Thanks, Anne. Look forward to our next chat.